Hello everybody, my name's Holly Woodruff, and today we will be talking about how to form a driving question for historical research. So what is a driving question? A driving question is the first step in your historical research journey. It's what captures your interest, which makes you want to learn more about something, and it's the basis for your research. What makes a good driving question? So Robert Williams, he gave us this kind of little outline of what would make a good question. So the first one, ask how or why an event happened. Ask what the consequences were of a particular event. Discuss the intellectual origins of a particular idea. Ask what the cultural context of an event was. Ask whether or not an individual was responsible for a certain act. Ask about his social history of a political event, or quantify broad trends in a society at a particular time. So those are good jumping off points when you're coming up with your question. It's important to come up with a question that's not too broad or too narrow, because that would make your research far more difficult. If it were too broad, there'd be too much information and not really any specifics. And if it's too narrow, you won't be able to find a lot of research on it. Also, try to focus on the how and the why rather than the who, what, where, when. Who, what, where, when are very important when talking about like a historical moment in time, but it's really not a great way to come up with a good driving question to push your research further. Also, try to come up with a question that can be considered argumentative and can be answered in multiple different ways. So in historical research, you kind of want to argue and show why you think the answer to this question is. And here's the facts to back it up with. So here's some examples of research questions. Something that would be too broad is African Americans and the Civil War. Something that would be too narrow is how were African Americans participating in the Civil War in Eastern Kentucky in June of 1864. So obviously that's way too narrow to be able to really expand on your research. And a question that kind of takes both of these and creates a perfect research question would be, how did African Americans participate, or how did African Americans' participation in the Union and Confederate armies change the course of the war? So that's something that you can find just the right amount of information on, and you can elaborate a little bit better than the first two questions. All right, so on the next slide, take a few minutes to fix these historical research questions, which are on this handout. And you can write them down on the side, obviously, and just pause the video, take a couple minutes to look at that. And then when you come back, we can move on. All right, so after you've looked through those, you can see in each of these questions how there's a little explanation on why this isn't a good question. So I hope that kind of gives you a little bit more of a good outline. It makes you feel comfortable with writing your questions. So now let's take a whack at it. First step, think of a topic that interests you about the Civil War. Any particular things stand out to you that you've seen in a movie and you want to see if it's true, or you've read in a book, something you want to elaborate on. So the second step after you think of your topic would be to write down a research question that you would like to elaborate on. And it's always good to think of a couple different questions just in case the first one doesn't end up working as you begin your research. So the third step, ask yourselves the next few questions to see if your topic is a feasible research guide. So the first one, will I be swimming in research because my topic is too broad? Again, you don't want to have a question that's going to come up with a million, scholarly journals about just an array of different things that can fall under the umbrella of your question. Will it be too difficult to find research on my topic because it's too specific? So opposite of the giant question is something that you can only find one or two, papers about, research on. That's just not really going to be a successful question. Can my question be answered with a yes or no? If it can, it is not open-ended enough. You shouldn't be able to answer your research question with yes, period. That's it. You want to be able to go through and say, well, look at these different ways to look at this question and how we can answer it. And the final one, can my question be answered in numerous ways with different sources? So again, you don't want to just, find one or two sources and that's all there is. You definitely want something that you can find different sources and it can be answered in different ways. Like, here's one person's opinion and this is why I don't think that one's correct and this is why I think that. So once you feel confident in your question, you can then begin your research. Always remember, it is perfectly okay to change your question as you research. Sometimes you find new information that can reshape your inquiry. So as you're going through and you're researching your question, say you're reading through an article and all of a sudden something else pops out and you're like, oh, that's really interesting. I kind of want to learn more about that. So you dig into that deeper and it'll kind of start to reshape what you really want to talk about and convey in your research. And that's totally okay. That's what this whole journey is about, is finding something that interests you and getting answers for yourself. So thanks, guys. I hope that kind of helped you out. I will link that handout in the comments below. If you want to take a look at that, you totally can. And have fun on your research journey. Bye.